Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you are all safe, healthy, and enjoy your time at home. My name is Gabriela Bergamo, and I'm from Brazil. And I'm very happy to host this event in partnership with the networking of Brazilian group to present Lionel Laroche. Here we are. This is amazing having many different cultures connected at the same time. And I'm very thrilled and honored to present Lionel Laroche. Lionel Laroche is an authority in cultural differences, the president of the Multicultural Business Solutions, author of 3 books where he talks about how we can turn cultural diversity into competitive advantage. He trained more than 20,000 people in more than 15 countries around the world. He works with human resources professionals, executives, counselors, career counselors, the Alberta government, and he works with companies that are interested in diversity and inclusion projects. Welcome, Lionel, and thank you for your generosity to be here with us today.
My pleasure. Thanks, Gabriela. Thank you for a great introduction. So we're going to talk about succeeding in Canada, and my idea here is to give everybody some pointers about understanding why, for so many of us, it is much more challenging than we thought it would be when we decided to move to Canada. So I've prepared a bit of a PowerPoint presentation, and I'm going to use that to give you an idea of what's going on. To me, the biggest thing that most immigrants need to realize when they come to Canada can be summarized in this particular slide. The idea is understanding the relative importance of technical skills and soft skills. Most immigrants, most of us, I come from France originally, come from cultures that are significantly more hierarchical than Canada is. Canada is not the most hierarchical, egalitarian culture in the world, but by and large, the countries that are less hierarchical than Canada are, first of all, there's few of them, and there's not a lot of people who immigrate from those countries to Canada. And this difference in the sense of hierarchy, like how important is your boss, how important, how much authority do people who are above you have relative to you, comes into play in so many situations in the workplace. So being an engineer by training, I love to illustrate things with diagrams, and that's what I'm going to do this afternoon. So we're going to look at the relative importance of technical skills and soft skills. Technical skills are usually fairly easy to understand. Most people understand that concept. It's usually the things we learn explicitly in universities. So as an engineer, calculus and all these things like that. On the other side, the soft skills is a concept which is less emphasized usually in the home countries of immigrants, while it is less emphasized in our home country than it is in Canada. And as a result, it's maybe harder for us to define it. I'm going to define soft skills as the combination of 3 sets of skills. The first one is your ability to work with other people. So if you think of communication skills, teamwork, leadership, negotiation, conflict resolution, and the list goes on, all these interpersonal skills that are so important in the workplace, well, that will be one component of soft skills. The second category of skills that I'm going to lump on the soft skills is your ability to manage yourself. What do we need to manage about ourselves in the workplace? Well, we need to manage our time, our energy level, our attention, what do we pay attention to, and one major thing is our own emotions. And as immigrants who are looking for a job, this is one situation where it really matters. Managing your own emotions is really critical. During the pandemic, managing our own emotions becomes, again, really critical. So that will be the second set of skills, self-management. The third category of skills that I'm going to lump into soft skills is your ability to manage the system. What do I mean by that? Well, let's say you are a student in university and you want to take a course which is not part of your program. How do you make that happen? Well, what I've found is some people are far more effective at that game than others. So getting things done within the system, when the system is not designed to do directly what you want to do, is a critical element. Now, technical skills and soft skills are independent. I'm sure many of the people who are watching this webcast will know people who have great technical skills and very poor soft skills, okay, like completely in the top left corner. In many countries, if you think of university professors, a number of them will end up there. I mean, I remember at Caltech, we had a professor, I mean, the guy was the world's expert in his field. That was no contest. But he had he was so absent-minded that working with him was absolutely no fun at all. I mean, he would be the kind of person who, if an idea popped into his head, the first thing he did was write it down so he didn't forget it. And by the time he had written down his idea, he had forgotten what he was doing before he had that idea. So he would be in the middle of a conversation with you, an idea popped up, he went to write it down, and then he never came back. And it's like, on the receiving end, it's like, well, do I stink or what kind of reaction? He was arrested for pumping gas at a gas station and leaving without paying. I mean, he had an idea, he wrote it down, he forgot about the gas, and kind of got arrested afterward. On the other side, some people have amazing soft skills and cannot turn their computer on. So the point is, technical skills and soft skills are independent. One does not imply the other. Now, when you are in Canada, you will quickly realize that people will place you on a grid, and this is what most large organizations in Canada will do explicitly. They will have a grid which has low, medium, high on each axis. And the question becomes, where do immigrants end up on this diagram? Well, having worked in this field for 20 years, it's very clear to me and to most people who are like when they come to Canada, and also like Canadians when they work with immigrants, that immigrants end up in the top left corner. Why do immigrants have high technical skills? Well, that's because of the point system. You would not be allowed to come to Canada if you didn't have enough points. And if you applied yourself, you know that many points are allocated to education. So as a result, the percentage of immigrants who have a bachelor or more of education is significantly higher than the percentage of people born and raised in Canada who have a bachelor or more of education. Immigrants are educated because we select them on that basis. Now, implicit in that definition is I'm looking at people who have come to Canada through the point system. In other words, legal immigrants. Now, some people come illegally, or they don't come through the point system, okay? But by and large, it's a very small number of people. If you look at the percentage of immigrants in Canada who did not come through the point system is very small compared with the total number of immigrants. Just to quantify it, okay, I mean, if we look at illegal immigrants, in the United States, it is estimated there are between 10 and 15 million illegal immigrants. Now, Canada is 1/10 of the American population. If we had the same number on a per capita basis, we would have somewhere between 1 and 1.5 million illegal immigrants. It is estimated we have between 40 and 100,000. In other words, 1/10 of what the US has. This, in my experience, makes a world of difference. Because when the average Canadian meets the average immigrant, the average Canadian assumes you're here legally and you have skills. The average American, when meeting the average Mexican, assumes that you're here illegally and you have no skills. You're going to wash bathrooms or pick grapes. Okay, so that makes a world of difference at first interaction. So immigrants in Canada have high technical skills. Why? Because that's the way we get selected. Now, why do immigrants have poor soft skills? Well, the key point to remember is this. Soft skills are defined by cultural standards. There's no universal standards for soft skills. And in particular, like some people who come to Canada, and there's no point in our point system allocated to soft skills. So as a result, among immigrants who come to Canada as adults, some have amazing soft skills by their home country standards. Some have average soft skills by their home country standards, and some have poor soft skills by their home country standards. Okay, I worked with a Ukrainian software engineer who was a pain in the neck by both Ukrainian and Canadian standards. I mean, the guy was, well, it was so bad that he managed to get himself fired before the end of his probation period. Okay, so I mean, you have to do something fairly drastic for that to happen. But he did, and it was totally understandable why he ended up in that situation. But the point is this: no matter where an immigrant is on the soft skill scale by his or her home country standards before he or she arrives in Canada, when we arrive in Canada, our soft skills will be measured by Canadian standards. And by Canadian standards, we will end up on the low end of the spectrum. Not because we are, a pain in the butt, just because it's different standards. I'll take my own example to illustrate this point, because I think it's really important to understand that this in detail. When I was in France, I was considered as having high soft skills. I was the captain of the rowing team in my university. I was the maître d' in a restaurant. I was one of the 2 guys who started the first career fair in that same university. So all situations that require high soft skills. When I arrived in Canada, my soft skills went overnight from high to low. I did not change overnight. What changed overnight was the criteria that the people around me were using to measure my soft skills. If any of you has worked with people from France, you probably know why. It's when I gave negative feedback. Because French negative feedback is blasting by Canadian standards. Where the average Canadian will tell you, it's a good report. You may want to look at section 3 some more, but overall good work. I said, redo section 3, it's wrong. It's the same message. You have to work more on section 3. But I delivered it so differently that as a result, no technician, for example, wanted to report to me when I worked at Procter & Gamble. The crux of the matter is the relative weights that we place on technical skills and soft skills. I'm going to express those relative weights in the form of percentages that add up to 100. The answer to what are the relative weights of technical skills and soft skills in your job will depend on a number of variables, which industry, which level, and so on and so forth. But if I look at the average of all professional jobs, so by professional, I mean anybody who needs a college or university degree to do their job, okay? In Canada, the average will end up being usually 50-50. Now, some jobs are more technical than others. Okay, if I take my own experience, when I worked at one point at Xerox as a research engineer, there my performance was measured by patents, and obviously my job was very, very technical in nature. At some other point, again at Xerox, I was a commercial development engineer, and my job was to sell patents from Xerox to other companies. And so I would go make technical presentations at conferences. So obviously at that point, soft skills mattered more to my success than when I was doing research. But if I do the average of all professional jobs in Canada, you find 50-50. Now there's one other important point. In Canada, as you move up in the organization, the weight placed on soft skills increases. It's really striking if you look, for example, at accounting firms. To be hired by an accounting firm like Ernst & Young, KPMG, Deloitte, PricewaterhouseCoopers, or which one am I missing? I think, yeah, well, whatever. You really need good technical skills. To become a partner in one of these organizations, you will need one fundamental skill, which is client relationship management. In other words, the ability to sell projects. Of course, you have to be able to deliver them once you've sold them, but you need to sell them in the first place, okay? And that's a soft skill. So with 50-50, lines of value in Canada and more generally in egalitarian cultures will be diagonal. What I mean by that is if I lose 1 unit on the technical skill scale, I can compensate by adding 1 unit on the soft skill scale because -1 + 1, 0. In our home countries, if I look at the home countries of most immigrants, so where do immigrants come from? Well, typically will come from Asia, Africa, Latin America, or Eastern Europe. Well, here we have a number of people coming from Brazil, but these will not be the only people listening to this podcast. There's going to be people from many parts of the world, but virtually all of us come from countries that are significantly more hierarchical than Canada. Back home, the boss is the boss is the boss. Which part don't you understand? And back home, what matters as a result is fundamentally technical skills. To be a good manager in a hierarchical culture, you don't need to convince your employees to do it your way. They'll do it your way because you're the boss. That is reason enough. What you do need is the ability to tell people how you want the job to be done from step 1 to step 10, because if you forget step 7, it grinds to a halt or goes completely off track. Conversely, and one way to kind of measure that is think about how important it is, or it was, to graduate from the best university back home. Well, in France, graduating from the best university makes a world of difference. The kind of opportunities you will have professionally will be very different from if you graduated from a second best or third best kind of university. In Canada, if you ask Canadians what's the best university in Canada, I can tell you, because I've done it many times, you end up with silence. Nobody says anything. Why? Because fundamentally the question makes no sense. Okay? The answer will be, it depends. So in Canada, soft skills matter far more than in our home countries. In our home countries, technical skills matter more than in Canada. And one soft skill, while the difference is absolutely striking in my experience, is making good presentations. That soft skill is far more emphasized in Canada than it is in our home countries. And you can measure it very, very easily by looking at the age at which kids start learning that soft skill. Like, you can measure the importance of a soft skill by looking at the age at which kids start learning that skill in the educational system. In Canada, most Canadian kids will do their first public presentation in like kindergarten. It's going to be called show and tell. The kid is told, tomorrow I want you to bring a picture, a toy, a stuffed animal, your doll, whatever, something that's important to you, and you will explain to the class why that thing is important to you. This is usually the first presentation of just about any Canadian kid, and Canadian kids keep making presentations throughout their school years, to the point where I'll always remember when my son was in grade 11, in his chemistry class, he was asked to prepare, the summative project was preparing a portfolio for a famous chemist. And my son chose Avogadro, and I was looking at him preparing that portfolio and thinking, like, how much chemistry is he learning really? And the answer was not much, but he was learning something very different. He was learning presentation skills again. So, huge difference. And when you ask the average immigrant, at what age did you make your first public presentation? I know, because the answer, I've asked that question to many audiences in workshops. The answer I typically get will be high school, university, in the workplace. When I got to Canada, not yet. So if I take my own example, my first public presentation was in grade 9. If I take the presentation of my wife, she grew up in China. Her first public presentation was in defending her undergraduate thesis. In other words, she was 22 by the time she presented for the first time. Now, both she and I have stood in front of the class way before, because back home, we get to recite poems or more, plays or like multiplication tables very early on. Canadian kids don't do that, okay? We recite, but we don't have to come up with a presentation. We don't have to come up with a material. We don't have to come up with a topic. The first time I had to choose the topic to prepare the presentation and present, research and do present, was in grade 9. Now, with 90-10, lines of equal value in our home countries will be almost flat. Because now, if I lose 1 unit on the technical skill scale, I'm going to need 9 more units of soft skills to compensate. Because -1 times 9 will be compensated by +1 times 9. Okay, so like I need 9 more units on the soft skill scale to compensate a drop in 1 unit on the technical skill scale. This is the fundamental reason why so many immigrants get so frustrated during their job search in Canada, and during their career later on as well. It kind of goes like this. Candidate A, recent immigrant, somebody who has good technical skills but poor soft skills by Canadian standards. I really want to emphasize that particular point, okay? Is competing for a job or promotion with candidate B. Candidate B is somebody who doesn't have maybe as high technical skills, but has much better soft skills by Canadian standards than candidate A. In this situation, who is going to get the job or the promotion? Well, if the people who make that determination are Canadian, which is usually the case in Canada, then B will be preferred. And how will A interpret the situation? Well, in many cases, the interpretation will be, it's unfair, it's discrimination. I'll take my own example to illustrate this point, because I experienced it when I was at Procter & Gamble. When I was there, I was candidate A. At one point, I competed with a guy for a promotion. This guy has a bachelor's, whereas I have a PhD. But he has way better soft skills by Canadian standards than I do. So what happened was he got the promotion. Actually, not only that, but they made him my boss. That was adding insult to injury. Okay? Now, how did I interpret the situation? It's totally unfair. Why? Because by my standards, I bring more value than he does. In France, a PhD beats a bachelor's any day. Unfortunately, my managers are not French, they're Canadian, and they're using a combination of technical skills and soft skills to determine who's going to get that promotion. And he ended up getting it because he has much better soft skills than I do by Canadian standards. Okay? Now, I'm a white guy, I competed with a white guy, so I didn't blame racism, I didn't blame sexism. Okay? I mean, I'm pretty sure it would have been my interpretation if I'd been a woman or visible minority. In my case, I blamed it on nepotism. He got the promotion because he plays golf with the boss. In a way, I'm right, but it's incomplete. It's not because he plays golf. It's playing with the golf with the boss gives him the opportunity to hear how our boss evaluates performance. What does he value? What does he think is important? And that, I didn't have access to that information, whereas he did by playing golf with the boss. Okay? So it's not a simple cause-effect relationship. But I felt it's nepotism. Okay? It's unfair. It's nepotism. Now, the average candidate A at this point, like if you're looking for a job, what do? Well, you keep looking for a job. If you already have a job, there's going to be 3 reactions, which are very damaging to people's careers. None of them work in Canada. They would work back home, but they don't work here. Okay? The first one, chronologically, is the average immigrant will complain. Now, who does the average immigrant complain to? Well, usually we're going to complain to people who come from the same country we come from. Could be our spouse, could be our friends, but we complain to other people who come from the same country we come from. So I'm Brazilian, I complain to other Brazilians. I'm Chinese, I complain to other Chinese. I'm French, I complain to other French. I mean, I know because I did that, okay? And what happens in that case? Well, we feel validated. Our friends, our coworkers, our compatriots will tell us, yeah, you're right, it is discrimination, because they look at the situation the same way. What happens? Well, the morale of the whole group goes down. And we get quite often in the situation where the blind lead the blind, because we get advice from people who see the world the same way, and unfortunately, their advice does not work. It would have worked back home, but it doesn't work here. I experienced this when I was at Xerox. When I worked for Xerox, there was one French lady who had joined Xerox 10 years before me. Her first name was Danielle. And every time I ran into difficulties, my first reaction was go talk to Danielle. And the conversation between Danielle and I invariably went this way. First, she and I agreed Canadians have no clue how to work together. Then we both agreed, okay, we're here. What do I do next? Well, then she gave me advice. The more I followed her advice, the worse my situation became. My situation turned around when I started to take advice from Canadians. Now, the advice I was getting from Canadians made no sense to me, but it worked. The advice I was getting from Danielle made complete sense, but did not work. Big difference. Yeah? So, one piece of advice I'm going to give to everyone who's listening to this podcast is this. Find yourself someone who can be your cultural mentor. Ideally, somebody born and raised in Canada, but at least somebody who's not from the same community you come from. So if you're Brazilian, anybody but a Brazilian. If you're French, anybody but a French person. Somebody who can, and the other, that person needs to be different from you, needs to have accomplished what you're trying to accomplish or studied it, okay? And you need to feel comfortable with that person. You need to be able to go to that person and say, I don't understand, help me. People like that will make a world of difference in the development of your career. So reaction number one, we complain to people who come from the same country we come from. Feels wonderful, but it doesn't help us at all. The second reaction in my experience, and it's very common, is we're going to go back to university and try to get a higher degree. Because, hey, if my master's degree doesn't work, I'll go get a PhD. Or if my PhD doesn't work, I'll go get an MBA or something like this, okay? And in many cases, sounds wonderful in theory, but it doesn't work in practice because we're working on the wrong issue. We don't need another master's degree. We need Toastmasters, okay? We need to practice presentations. We need to practice conflict resolution. We need to practice negotiations and so on and so forth. So we need to work on our soft skills far more than we need to work on our technical skills. And to be more specific, we need to work on our soft skills by Canadian standards. So that will make a world of difference. Okay? The third very common reaction, which is I see it far more in sectors that are booming. So in other words, right now, there's not going to be a lot of sectors where that happens. It's people decide, okay, if this organization is not merit-based, I'll go get another one. Okay, so if it is a booming sector, then you're not happy with your company, you're going to find another job very quickly. And I've seen people go from organization to organization, and they run into the same problem with different people. And they eventually, some of them realize the problem is on my end, not their end. Okay, or it's actually, to be more specific, it is an interaction problem. It is between me and them, not me by myself, the interaction between me and them. So I'd like everybody to remember 3 fundamental points from this slide. Number 1, we need to understand how our performance is measured. Number 2, remember that soft skills matter more in Canada than in our home countries. And number 3, remember that soft skills are measured by cultural standards, which means we need to learn what good soft skills look like in a Canadian context. And there's one soft skill in particular that we all need to learn when we come to Canada for professional reasons, particularly when we're doing our job search or managing our careers. It is learning to think like a specialist. What do I mean by that? Well, most of us, when we describe ourselves, will essentially describe ourselves as generalists. Back home, that's what gets you the job. That's what gets you the opportunities. And Canada is quite different. There's a couple of reasons for it. Okay, Canada is definitely a country of specialists. Canadians define themselves and think of themselves as specialists. But it's really striking if you ask any immigrant, well, what do you do professionally? The answer will usually be, I am a, and then they'll give you the title of their degree. So I am an engineer, I am an accountant, I am a sales rep, I am something like that. Canadians will not define themselves that way because that's too broad. They will give you something far more specific. A good case in point is the difference between how family doctors define themselves in Canada versus the UK. In the UK, if you ask family doctors, how do they define themselves? What do they call themselves? They will usually say they're GPs, general practitioners. Canadian family doctors will not call themselves general practitioners. They will call themselves specialized in family medicine. In other words, they specialize in being generalists because that's what family medicine is about. Okay? Now, there's 2 reasons for this. One is, well, the more complex an economy becomes, the more specialized the jobs are. So if you think about the economy of just about any country 200 years ago, there weren't that many jobs. You could be a baker, a butcher, you could be a police officer, you could be a merchant. I mean, you could probably maybe 20 jobs, and that's it. Okay, that's all there was. Now you have jobs like search engine optimizers and all kinds of things that even 20 years ago did not exist. So as the economy becomes more complex, the number of jobs increases and there's more of a need for specialization. But there's one more factor which is really specific to Canada. It is because even if you compare with the United States, Americans define themselves like specialists, but not nearly to the same extent as Canadians do. And there's a good reason for it. It is our geographic location. We are right next door to the United States. What it means is any organization in Canada, any corporation that grows beyond a certain size will end up competing with an American company that does the same thing. Canada can never win on price. We will never be the low-cost producer of anything, except if it is something we take off the ground directly. So we can produce iron ore cheaply, we can produce canola cheaply. But if any processing is involved, we immediately lose because our domestic market is too small, our distribution costs are too high, the country has a small population relative to the geography, and so on. We cannot compete with countries like China, Vietnam, or Kenya on price again because, well, our salaries are too high compared with those countries. So the only viable strategy for Canadian companies is fundamentally niche marketing. If you go to the website of just about any Canadian company, you will see in the first paragraph, usually in the first few words, it will say, we specialize in. So if the organization thinks of itself as being specialized, what kind of employees do you think it's looking for? Specialists. So learning to think as a specialist is something that I really want to encourage anybody who's listening to this presentation to start doing or do to an even greater extent. And I'm going to show you an example where it made a really big difference. Again, this is, so his first name is Thomas. Thomas is an Iranian civil engineer. And I will always remember when I met him, like the first thing he told me is, I'm a civil engineer, I can build anything. Now, remember specialist versus generalist. From a generalist perspective, that sounds like a great statement. From a specialized perspective, that doesn't work at all. I can build anything to Canadians. If you can do everything in Canada, what it means is you cannot do anything well. So you will be a jack of all trades, master of none. So I asked Thomas, all right, what have you built? So Thomas told me, well, I've built high-rises, tunnel, bridges, roads, and dams. Now, if you think of the kind of work that a civil engineer can build, well, he's covered a wide range, quite a bit of the gamut. I said, all right, but let's go more into the details. Okay, so you've told me you have built bridges, roads, tunnels, high-rise, and dams. My question to you now is, how much time did you spend on each of these categories? So how much time did you spend building bridges? How much time did you spend building roads? So we went through that exercise. He had 25 years of experience, and it took a little bit of work because some projects would involve both bridges, roads, and tunnels, so you have kind of allocated accordingly. But over time, the picture that emerged was essentially something like this. He had spent 1 year on bridges, roads, and tunnels, 2 years on high-rises, and 20 years on dams. Now, a Canadian engineer with the exact same experience would never describe himself as, I can build anything. What they would say is, I'm a dam specialist, if you excuse the pun, okay? I specialize in dams. Not only that, but a dam is a very complex thing by Canadian standards. I mean, it is a complex thing in general, but Canadians will see it as like particularly segmentation. And so you have within the dam kind of building industry, you have people who specialize in the concrete, people who specialize in the foundation, people who specialize in water management, power production, and so on and so forth. In Tamas' case, it turned out that the last 12 years of his career in Iran, he had done one thing, and one thing only. He had retrofitted the instrumentation and monitoring system of existing dams, essentially convert them from analog to digital. And that's the thing he had done for 12 years nonstop. So obviously, he had the specialization, but he was choosing to describe his experience as being broad. I can do everything. I can tell you that Tamas, when I met him, had been pretty much unemployed or underemployed for 2 years. When he started to define himself as a specialist in retrofitting the instrumentation and monitoring systems of existing dams, he got a job at Manitoba Hydro, where he was retrofitting the instrumentation and monitoring systems of existing dams. In other words, By describing ourselves as specialists, we reduce the number of jobs for which we perceive ourselves as being qualified tremendously. But the probability of us getting one of those jobs increases significantly. And in my experience, that is the most effective way of getting a job in Canada. So at this point, I'd like to bring everybody's attention to the resume that a number of you have received before. And Stella, if you want to put on the resume on the screen so everybody sees what it looks like. So this is the resume of a Chinese lady. I met her literally 8 days ago, Friday, a week from yesterday. And this was the resume she gave me. Okay, obviously I've blanked out her name and contact information because I don't want anybody to be able to figure out who that person is, and it's not material. What is material is what her resume says. If you look at the profile, you will notice that it is exactly that. It tries to say, I can do everything. And remember that when you say I can do everything in Canada, what Canadians hear is you cannot do anything well. You are a jack of all trades, master of none. So a good, like I talked to her for about an hour and a half or something like this. And in essence, the goal is to identify what is, in her case, her specialization. What does she do that the average person in her job would not be able to do? And my experience is most people, it's not that easy to identify your specialization because back home, we did a lot of things. And so we have touched on a lot of areas. The challenge is that doesn't work here. You need to identify what is your strong suit. In particular, there's one fundamental question I would like everyone to think, really think about answering. What problem are you good at solving? That is the key question that will drive your career in Canada. It will drive your job search because obviously the people who will hire you will be the people who have that problem and want to solve it or have it solved. You will also drive your career because as you develop, you'll be able to solve bigger and bigger problems. And that's the important part, okay? So what problem are you good at solving? Learning to think like a specialist, okay? I mean, if you look at the resume, I mean, like there are lots of bullet points, but if you had to summarize what problem does this lady solve, it really doesn't jump at you. It is not obvious, okay? So let's go back to the PowerPoint. And I would like to talk a little bit now about what happens to most of us as we, manage our lives and our careers in Canada. So again, being an engineer, I'm going to use a chart because if I have a good diagram, it means so much more to me than just words. I hope that many of you will agree with me. So we're going to look at progress versus time. Progress is time is a fairly obvious one. Okay? Progress, people may not be clear on what I'm trying to say. So progress is essentially whichever way you measure your progress in life. There's many ways of measuring progress, okay? Some people measure it by money, net worth. I'm sure many of you have heard that expression. Some people will measure it, by the square footage of their house. How big is their house? Some people measure it by the kind of car they drive. Professors in universities will often measure their progress by publications. How many refereed publications do you have? How many students did you graduate? How much money did you get for your research? What awards did you get? Things like that. What ratings did you get from your students? If you're in the army, you might measure your progress by rank. Medals, title, things like that will be a measure of your progress. So the point I'm making is there's many different ways of measuring progress, but my experience is we all have one, at least one. Okay? Now, what happens to most immigrants as, we kind of decide to leave our home country and come to Canada? So let's say back home, we were making some progress at a certain pace, and things would probably have continued if we had stayed there. I'm showing it as a straight line. It is not always a straight line. In particular, with the pandemic, many people will experience the feeling of going backwards because, hey, I lost my job, or I've been furloughed, or my job is on hold for like several weeks or months. Okay, but when you are in your home country, you know if you're making progress or not, and how much progress you're making. Okay? So it's not always a straight line, but you have a good sense for where you are. Now, let's say the point where the line goes from solid to dotted is the point where we packed everything, we took the family, and we arrived at the airport in Canada. Okay? So at that point, well, how did we feel? Did we feel we made progress, meaning like we're going up? Did we feel like we're going down, or we're going just sideways? Well, my experience is for most immigrants, when we arrive in Canada, we have that strong feeling like, oh my God, what did we get ourselves into? That happens in particular for Brazilians if they arrive in January, because like for the average Brazilian, like January in Canada is a pretty shocking experience. You know? Could happen even in August. I remember when my wife arrived from China, she said like the first, I think it was the long weekend, the civic holiday weekend in early August. It was like +10, and her reaction was, man, if it's +10 in August, what is it going to be like in January? Okay, so, but the point is, another situation where many of us end up feeling, oh my God, what did we get ourselves into? Is we fail our driving test. We have to take the driving test because for whatever reason, our driving license is not accepted in Canada, and suddenly we fail, whereas we've been driving for many years without accident back home. So there's a strong sense of like, oh my God. Now what happens? Well, some people will go down, and eventually they decide, forget it, we are going home. My experience is very few people go home. Very few immigrants go home, okay? In the only two categories of people that I have found who kind of went home in significant numbers would be people who come from the Middle East, like I'm talking about Kuwait and Dubai and Qatar, places like that. People there, you cannot become a citizen of Kuwait or Qatar, so like you're always kind of in between. So people will come to Canada, the family settles, and the husband goes back and work there and makes enough money there to support himself and the family. The other category of immigrants that goes back in more significant numbers these days is Chinese immigrants, particularly those who came as with a significant amount of money. Well, they kind of go back and forth between China and Canada. But by and large, if you come from other parts of the world, you're probably going to stay. And if you stay, well, eventually you're going to turn the corner. Now, for most people, turning the corner means you get your first job. Now, in many, many cases, the first job we have here is not nearly as good as the last job we had back home. But it's a job, and it's a good start. Now, what happens afterwards? And this is a critical element. Now, I'm going to show it as either or. It's not one or the other. There's a whole range of things in between. But just to keep things simple, I'm going to kind of show you the two extreme ends of the spectrum. One end of the spectrum is this. Somebody who got a survival job and gets stuck in it. And I'm sure virtually every immigrant on this podcast knows somebody like that. Okay. For me, the people I meet who quite often fit in that category will be cab drivers who were engineers or medical doctors back home. Okay. I also know one guy who was in China. He was the team lead of a software development and in Canada, he's a dealer in a casino. And there's nothing wrong with being a dealer in a casino or being a cab driver. That's not the point. Okay. The point is, these people do not feel they made progress compared with where they were back home, and can be quite frustrated. Now, the other category of people, and again, I'm showing the extremes. Okay, there's all kinds of things in between, but these are people who kind of combine what they learned here in Canada with what they knew back home. They develop good soft skills by Canadian standards, and they take off, and at some point, they cross the dotted line. What does crossing the dotted line mean? Well, in one word, success. This is why we came. We came to Canada to have more of what matters to us in life than we would have had if we had stayed back home. Otherwise, what's the point? Okay, nobody comes to break even. There's too much work involved. Okay, so, and there are plenty of immigrants who succeed. I'll take it, if you take money as an example, among the 100 richest Canadians, my understanding is close to 30 were born outside of Canada. One of the best example of an immigrant who has succeeded probably beyond his wildest dreams when he decided to come to Canada is Tobias Lütke, the CEO of Shopify. Tobias Lütke came from Germany, and he created a company which is now the second largest company on the Toronto Stock Exchange. And it's right behind Royal Bank. So somebody who has clearly succeeded very, very well financially and in other ways. I know other people who have succeeded based on, for example, change, like because of something that was not monetary. I'll take a very simple example. I remember working with a couple. The lady, they were both from Colombia. She had been in Colombia. She was a medical doctor. He was a civil engineer. They came to Canada. She got a job as a paramedic, and he became a laborer on a construction site. So professionally, obviously, both of them felt like a serious step back. But I remember talking to her, and she said, "Oh, we have made so much progress by coming to Canada." Because for her, the key part was she knew her son would come home. Her son had been kidnapped in Colombia. She said, "We paid the ransom, but we were lucky he came back. But I knew that one day he would be kidnapped again, and at some point he won't come home." In Canada, the odds of him coming home are pretty good. So that's progress. So depending on how people measure progress, like it can take some time. But there's one fundamental point that I would like everybody on this podcast to remember. It is this: how long do you think it's going to take to succeed? Not to get your first job, to succeed. Okay. In other words, to feel like you have more of what matters to you in life than you would have had if you had stayed back home. So, having worked with many immigrants and followed what happens to them, okay, what I've found is typically takes 6 to 15 years. The key part is it is measured in years, not in months. Many immigrants, when I meet them, like in the first few weeks when they arrive, have essentially an expectation like this one. If I ask people who have just arrived in Canada, how long do you think it's going to take you to succeed? Then the answer I get is usually measured in months, like 3 months, 6 months, 12 months, maybe 18 months. But they're completely uncalibrated as to how long it's going to actually take them. So there's one fundamental point I'd like everybody to remember from this. It is a marathon, not a sprint. The way you prepare for a marathon is very different from the way you prepare for a sprint. You need to build a solid base in order to win a marathon. To win a sprint, it's very different. So you need to focus on speed. Marathon, you need to focus on distance. It's a very different focus, again. Now, one question I get very often, so I'm going to skip these 2 points, but one question I get very often is, what percentage of people go sideways versus up? And the answer to that question is, I don't know, because it's not one or the other. There's a whole range of things in between. But one question that I can answer, because this is something that I really studied extensively, is what makes the difference between people who go up and people who go sideways? So I'll boil it down to 5 words. The first one is drive. You have to keep trying, and you will have to work hard for the rest of your life to succeed in Canada. This is a fact of life in my experience as an immigrant. Because the system is different, it's new to you and so on. It's new to me for sure. What I've learned is I have to allocate 1 hour of what I would call cultural inefficiency every day. So in other words, what I can do in 8 hours, probably the average Canadian will be able to do it in 7. That extra hour I allocated to cultural inefficiency. I don't know how to do it, so I have to do it again. Or I don't do it well the first time, I had to tweak it the second time. Drive, in my experience, for most immigrants, not that much of a challenge. I mean, where I see the biggest challenge is people who follow their spouse. The spouse is really motivated to move to Canada, but they're not. They came because my spouse wanted to come to Canada. And that creates a lot of issues. But drive by itself is not sufficient. I have seen plenty of people be very frustrated and very unsuccessful by their own standards because they were lacking one fundamental skill: adaptability. Drive without adaptability kind of looks like this. It's the immigrant who has created one resume, sent 500 copies of it to 500 different places, got 0 response, and keeps sending the same resume. That is drive without adaptability. You need to adapt. It's a different world. It's not good or bad. It's not better or worse. It's different. And we have to learn how it works. Okay? Another important element is a positive attitude. Now, this is something I learned the hard way, because in France, we don't smile to strangers, particularly in Paris. Like, you smile to a stranger in Paris, that person will go on the defensive automatically, because we're not expected to smile to strangers. Being as a workshop facilitator, as a keynote speaker, I've learned very quickly that I had to smile. No matter how much my life sucks, I need to smile. And I'm speaking from first-hand experience, because my first wife died of cancer, and I did a workshop the day before she died. I had to smile, because if I didn't smile, I would end up with 2 problems instead of 1. She is going to die. There's nothing I can do about that. But if I don't smile, I'm going to also lose my business. And now I'm going to have financial problems on top of family problems. I have to choose. So positive attitude is really a critical one, okay? Keep in mind, you can complain to Canadians about the weather endlessly. I mean, the weather is always bad in Canada. That's a given. In what way is it bad? That we can discuss, but it's bad, okay? That's a fact of life. But don't complain to Canadians about anything else but the weather. Keep that for your friends and relatives. Another critical element is ownership. You need to own your career. Now, yes, the government can improve. The federal government can improve its immigration process. The provincial government can improve its immigration process. Regulatory bodies can improve their licensing and registration process. Employers can improve their recruiting processes. Municipal governments can improve the way they deliver employment insurance and so on. Not-for-profit organizations can improve. But in the end, it is my problem. I need to find my own solution. And the solution that works for me will probably not work for many people who are listening to this podcast, and vice versa. You need to find your own solution. And we go back to that concept of specialization. What is your specialization? What is your solution? Finally, there's one critical element. I called it perspective. What I mean by that is the following. How do you see the world? Do you see the world in black and white, 0 or 1, right or wrong? Or do you see it in shades of gray? A scale between 0 and 1. My experience is people who see the world in binary terms, 0 or 1, right or wrong, black or white, run into a lot of difficulties when they're dealing with cultural differences. Because cultural differences are all about there's more than one way to get to the same result. So you need to be able to be flexible and try to think of other ways of getting to the same result. Because the way that would have worked back home may not work well here, or may not work at all. It may completely backfire. So learning, to think in shades of gray instead of black and white is, in my experience, a critical element for success. Now, there's one important point, because I've talked about this. I mean, I've used the same slides with a lot of Canadians, and it's fascinating to see their reaction, because they all say, you know what, these 5 characteristics apply to Canadians the same way. And that is true. For anybody to succeed in Canada, whether you were born here or not, you will need drive, adaptability, a positive attitude, a sense of ownership, and see the world in shades of gray. It's just the starting point of the average Canadian is closer to understanding the system than the starting point of the average immigrant. But they run into the same problems, and they need to learn develop all these skills. Okay? Now I'm going to end, because when it comes to ownership, this is in my experience, I want to expand a little bit on this one. Some of you are probably familiar with a guy called Stephen Covey. He wrote a book, which I think sold 10 million copies or something like that. It's called The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. In that book, Stephen Covey talks about 2 circles. It's a concept that I found extremely helpful, and I want to emphasize it, because I've seen a lot of immigrants run into difficulties related to that. So he talks about 2 circles. He has the circle of concern, that's the bigger circle, and then a smaller circle in the middle, and there sometimes he calls it control, sometimes he calls it influence. So he kind of does not differentiate between the 2 concepts. I'm going to differentiate, and so we'll end up with 3 circles. We're going to have control, the smallest circle. Okay? We're going to have concern, and somewhere in between we'll have influence. So what does it mean? Control means you decide. You decide what clothes you're going to wear. You decide what you write on your resume. That is entirely within your control. Now, when you decide what clothes you're going to wear, obviously, if the clothes you intended to wear are still at the dry cleaner, you're not going to be able to wear them. Okay? So control does not mean you'll automatically get what you want, but there's a 99% probability that you can get what you want, because you know what clothes you have. Okay? Same thing with what's on your resume. Well, you decide what you write. Now, you cannot invent experience, but you decide what you write. In concern are all the things that impact you, but don't impact them. So obviously, the pandemic is a good example of something that has impact on us, but we cannot change it. Well, we have some impact on it, some tiny influence by how closely do we follow social distancing norms, but that influence is relatively small in the grand scheme of things. Influence is somewhere in the middle. Influence means you have some impact, but you don't always get what you want. So let me give you an example. Like during a good case in point is, well, during your career, you can work hard, and that is within your control. And if you work hard, you have a good chance of keeping your job and maintaining financial security for you and your family. That, you control how hard you work. That is clear. Now, what you don't control, but it has an impact, is, well, what are the results of the organization that employs you? If you work hard, the results will be better. Now, how much influence you have will depend on a number of factors. One is your level within the organization. The other one is the size of the organization. If I take my own example, I worked for Xerox and for Procter & Gamble. At the time, both organizations had roughly 100,000 employees. So me working hard, I have some influence, but it's not a whole lot. Right now, I am the president, founder, and only employee of Multicultural Business Solutions. So being the only employee and president, I have far more influence on how effective the financial results of the organization. So my influence has increased tremendously by going from a large organization to a small one. But I don't have control, because I can tell you right now with the pandemic, I do a lot fewer workshops than I did before. So that's obvious. Concern, well, these are things that have impact on us, but we don't impact them. In Canada, there's a number of things that impact us, but we don't impact them. One is the price of oil. Another one is whatever the US president decides in terms of, putting tariffs on China or not, putting tariffs on Canada or not. The pandemic, like, can we open the economy or not? All these things at the individual level, our influence is tiny. And as a result, we might as well just look at it as it's part of our circle of concern. So control, influence, concern. And there's one fundamental thing that I would like everybody who's listening to this podcast to really keep in mind. The number one thing you control when you are looking for a job and you're managing your career is your time. You really need to think about how you use your time. Make sure that when you are trying to network with people, well, they're the right kind of people, and you try to influence them in a way that works for them. When you prepare a resume, make sure that it is targeted for the industry and the position you're trying to get. Make sure that it describes you as a specialist, not as a generalist. Try to make sure that you quantify your accomplishments and so on. I want to encourage everybody who's listening to this podcast to really work on defining who they are professionally and what they want to become and how to communicate that to people. In particular, remember that question I mentioned earlier, which is, what problem are you good at solving? I know that for most people, most immigrants, when I ask that question, what problem are you good at solving, I get completely blank looks, or my company didn't have problems, or I'm an engineer, I can solve any kind of technical problem. None of these answers work by Canadian standards. You have to be more specific. So I'm going to stop here so that we have time for questions, but I do want to give you, if anybody's interested, okay, two things. The first thing is the link to my YouTube channel. If you go to this link, if you go to this channel, you will see there's about 35 videos in total, two series, one that was recorded in August 2017, the other one in November 2019. And we'll encourage everybody who's looking for a job in Canada as an immigrant to watch all of them. Now, I know it's going to take you time. If you watch this, and this is not like Game of Thrones, you're not going to watch all 12 hours in one sitting, okay? That's not going to work. But I can promise you that if you watch all of them, your job search the speed of your job search will accelerate tremendously. You won't have to pay anything. You don't even have to watch commercials. So you really have all the incentives and no downside to actually do it. The other thing is, for those of you who like reading more than watching, so as Gabriela mentioned at the beginning, I wrote 3 books. Okay, so these are the cover pages of each of these books. The one on the left is called Managing Cultural Diversity in Technical Professions. The one in the center is called Recruiting, Retaining, and Promoting Culturally Different Employees. And the one on the right is called Danger and Opportunity, Bridging Cultural Diversity for Competitive Advantage. If you're an engineer, an IT professional, an accountant, I encourage you to read the first one, the one on the left. Well, engineers, IT professionals mostly. If you're looking for a job, then the one in the middle is definitely the one for you. And if you work at the organization level, either you're in HR or you're a manager, then I encourage you to read the one on the right. So I'll stop here. And I'll pass it back to Gabriela in order to tell us what questions or comments people have had during this presentation.
Okay, Lionel, thank you so much. We really appreciate your advice. It couldn't be more relevant right now, right? Now we're gonna jump to the questions. So the first question is from Alexandra.
Okay.
Lionel, besides presentation and specialization, what are soft skills important in Canada?
Oh my God, there's a very long list of soft skills that are important. But you need to appreciate that which soft skills matter for each particular immigrant will depend on the kind of job you are trying to get. So for those of you who have a job, then I would encourage you to ask your coworkers and essentially do some form of 360 feedback and find out, in their opinion, which soft skills do you need to work on in order to be more effective. Okay? Or talk to your HR professional or coach and figure out which soft skills you need to develop in order to get to whatever job you want. If you're looking for a job, then there's 3 critical soft skills. One is communicating in writing, which is your resume and email and stuff like that. Interviewing, critical, and I'm talking about information interview, but also job interviews. And networking. These will be the top 3 soft skills that any job seeker needs to work on extensively. So if you have a job, there will be things like conflict resolution, there will be negotiation, but it depends on your job. I mean, I know, for me as a commercial development engineer, I really needed to do great presentations, but I didn't have to negotiate the contracts. So that skill was irrelevant to me. Okay. Now in my current job, I need to negotiate. So I've had to learn to manage that. Okay. So it really depends on your job. And so ask the people around you.
Thank you, Lionel. So the next one is from Andrea. What would be the strategies to grow in an organization, being a specialist? Do I need to, yeah.
So very often people think, well, if I'm a specialist, how can I become a manager? Because the two. So the important thing is you don't go overnight from your current job to the job above you. What you need to do is gradually take on some of the responsibilities of your boss. Okay. And obviously you have to shed responsibilities at the lower level. You give them to somebody who reports to you. You buy software to speed up the process, whatever it is, but you find a way. Okay. So typically you become a specialist, but you specialize in solving a bigger category of problems. Okay. So for example, if I'm a good sales rep, well, the problem I know to solve is the problems that my clients have. But if I want to become a sales manager, I need to help my coworkers, other sales reps, learn how to solve the problem of their customers. So it is somewhat the same skill, but in a different context. And that's growing, and then you can become a sales manager. Okay. So I would really encourage people on this one. In the series of videos that was recorded in August 2017, there is a video, I think it's number 17, which is about getting a promotion. And I will really encourage people to watch that one, because I can, again, this is a video that it's a situation where I have a diagram, and the diagram will mean a lot more. So go watch the video.
Okay. Thank you again.
Okay.
The next question is from LK. So in government organization and non-profit organization, how many weights are for technical and soft skills, if there is the difference?
So generally speaking, the bigger the organization, the more important soft skills will be in Canada. Technical experts usually thrive in small consulting firms in Canada, not in large organizations. You can look at it in a very simple way. Think about all the medical officers who are speaking on TV all the time. Dr. Tam, Dr. Henry, and so on, all these provincial or federal public officers, public health officers, okay? I'm sure they're good technically, don't get me wrong, okay? They know their job. But they have one skill that is critical. They have the ability to speak to elected officials and help them understand complex concepts. They also have the ability to do press conferences and so on. Those are soft skills, and they really matter. So the bigger the organization, the more important soft skills become to your success, in my experience in Canada. Like people who are really good technically will do way better in small consulting firms than in a large government organization. And I know this is really a challenge for most immigrants, because most immigrants want to work for large organizations because that gives us social status. Okay? You work for IBM, you don't need to explain what you do for IBM. Doesn't matter. You work for IBM. Everybody knows IBM, you get social status. Okay? You could sweep the floor at IBM. That's okay. You work for IBM. Okay? I work as a self-employed person. Okay? Nobody understands what I do. Okay? So, but I can tell you, I had to make the switch because I can tell you, my parents had a very hard time when I left Xerox to become self-employed. Okay? Why would I want to leave Xerox? But at the same time, for many immigrants, it's easier. Well, no, it's not easier. It's more likely. It's hard, but it's more likely you're more likely to succeed as in smaller organization than in a large one, in my experience.
Okay.
Hope that answers your question.
Yeah, this is very valuable.
Okay.
Well, thank you from Aline.
Yeah.
Once more immigrants have been assuming management position, what is your opinion about the stability of this standard related to soft skills and technical skills?
So this is a real challenge. Okay. Like I'll take the example I'm most familiar with, which is immigrants who came to Canada in their 40s or 50s, and they have an engineering degree, but they moved up in the hierarchy back home, and they became engineering managers. So maybe, I'll take a very simple example. I remember one guy I was working with, his first name was Giza, and Giza was a plant manager in Serbia. Okay? And when he came to Canada, he was in his 50s, and this is really a difficult situation because he cannot get a job as a plant manager in Canada. People don't know how you manage people in Serbia, but it's very obvious that it's different from Canada. So it's not going to work. He cannot get that job. He can also not get the job as an engineer because he hasn't done it in so long that his technical skills are rusty. So people who come to Canada are in their late 40s or 50s have a very hard time because they are the people who lose so much because of the change in the way soft skills are measured. It's the kind of positions that immigrants are most likely to get initially in Canada will be what I call back office individual contributor. Back office means you don't work with clients, because clients, it's a different way of working with clients in Canada. Not better or worse, different. Okay? And the other one is individual contributor means you do not manage anybody. Nobody reports to you, because the way you manage people in Canada is different than in Brazil or in France. And if you try to do it the way it worked back home, you will fall flat on your face very likely. Okay? So I really encourage immigrants to look for back office individual contributor positions, because that's where we have our best chances.
At least at the beginning.
Yes. Oh yeah. Down the road, I'm talking about the first step. Absolutely.
First step. Yeah. So we have a little bit more time.
Yeah.
From Raquel, how can we improve our soft skills?
Okay, great question. So first question is, which soft skills are you trying to improve? Okay, so we come back to that previous question. Okay, you need to identify which soft skills you need to improve. So let's assume that you have identified a list of soft skills you should work on. The first step I want to encourage every immigrant to be conscious of is you cannot improve more than 3 soft skills at the same time. So don't try to work on 10 soft skills at once, because you will not get anywhere. You won't make any progress. It's like trying to learn 10 music instruments at the same time. That is not going to work. Okay? If you're going to learn to play music, you start with a flute and you become good at the flute before you try something else. Okay? It's the same idea. Learn one, two, maybe maximum 3 soft skills at the same time. Okay? So which one? That you really need to focus. Okay? Let's say you've identified a particular soft skills. Well, let me take one example, because I'll take project management, because that's one that happens all the time. If I tell the average immigrant, you need to improve your project management skills, the very first reaction of probably 90% of the immigrants I've talked to, their first reaction was, I will go get a PMP certification. Okay? Because we equate learning with getting a diploma or a certificate or a degree. Because back home, that's the idea. Okay? In Canada, you need to remember that learning can take place in many different ways. And most soft skill learning is, in my experience, requires practice. If you only learn you cannot learn, it's a little bit like learning to dance by reading a book. That only goes so far. Okay? So in order to learn soft skills, you will need to practice. So you need opportunities to practice in a context that is not, if you mess up, it won't have consequences. So this is where volunteering becomes a big deal. This is where, so for example, let's say I want to become a better project manager. Yes, I can get the certification from PMI, but that's only one way, and this is still working on the technical skill scale. Okay? I want people to work on the horizontal scale. So what do I mean by that? Well, you read a book. You discuss it with people who are good at it. You shadow people who do it well. You join a club that focuses on that. You volunteer to become the manager of the United Way campaign in your organization. You volunteer for an association and you manage one of the projects there. There's all kinds of ways that, one, don't require any out-of-pocket cost, and two, do not involve getting a piece of paper, but will be far more effective in the long run than focusing on that piece of paper.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay? And you can work with a coach. I mean, that's what coaches are about. If you really think that there's one soft skill you want to develop, find yourself a coach who specializes in developing that kind of soft skill.
Yeah.
Like in Canada, you have coaches who specialize in training salespeople, and you have coaches who specialize, whatever. There's, again, specialization.
Yeah, they are very important here.
Absolutely. Yeah.
The next one, Melissa, could you please tell me if the soft skills importance is also applicable to skilled trade workers?
Oh, yes. It will. So if you have poor soft skills in a skilled trade environment, it will come out very clearly. People will essentially make fun of you. They may not be nice about it. I mean, and if it really gets bad, they will actively create problems for you. Okay? I've seen people essentially take away some of their tools, or they're trying to get the message. One of the something you're doing does not work for us. Okay, so you really need to, it still applies in the skilled trade environment. Okay, and if you have good soft skills, that's when you can become a shift leader. That's when you can become a union rep. You have all kinds of opportunities, and in particular, if you're really good skilled trade and you're good technically, and you have really good soft skills, you can become a client-facing tradesman. So, for example, a good plumber, if you're a good plumber but you don't have good soft skills, you work as a plumber in an organization. I'm not saying all the plumbers who work in a large organization have poor soft skills. That's not the point. But if you really have really good soft skills, then you can become a self-employed plumber, and your income can be significantly higher than an engineer if you're a good plumber.
Yeah.
Okay. So yes, so soft skills matter at all levels.
Yeah.
I mean, this is the fundamental point. They matter at all levels of society in Canada.
And you can find the required soft skills in the job description or asking, right? Informational interview.
That's right. Absolutely. Yeah.
So the next, how do you suggest to improve your presentation skills at home?
Toastmasters. Toastmasters, for those of you who are not familiar with this organization, it's a not-for-profit organization. And the whole idea is to give people an environment where they can practice their presentation skills with people who are all trying to learn. So if you make a mistake, nobody's going to blame you, or nobody's going to make you feel bad. They'll give you feedback and they'll be supportive. And I definitely encourage every single immigrant to do at least 1 year of Toastmasters. The other one is practice. So practice on your own first, but practice with friends. Okay, practice with become a volunteer and practice in a not-for-profit context.
I need to do my Toastmasters training. So Lionel, this is mine. So I'm appearing as Multicultural Business Solutions here. What would be the best advice to manage the job search if one person has to work out of his or her field during this challenging time?
Okay. So some people, I mean, this is a big challenge. You can't work and you have to make ends meet. Okay. So some people will end up essentially having to take a survival job. And one really critical part about survival jobs is this. I encourage people to, one, don't feel like you're going down. I mean, Canadians will actually admire you for taking a survival job because it clearly means you are trying to do whatever it takes to support your family. And you will swallow your pride. Okay, that is a big deal. So it will be viewed positively as long as you describe it positively. Okay, if you bitch and complain about it, then it won't work. Yeah. So it is a positive thing. Now, what kind of survival job do you take is one area. So I encourage immigrants to take survival jobs in a service position, because that will help increase your soft skills by Canadian standards. Okay. And the other thing is try as much as possible, and I know in some cases it is possible, other cases it's not, try to find survival jobs within the industry you are targeting. It's easier said than done. Okay, I mean, there are some industries where nobody's gonna hire you to do survival, like not-for-profit work in the chemical industry. Okay, like that just doesn't happen. So, but in some areas, yeah, it is possible. So this is where creativity comes in. Okay, but I really encourage people to try and find survival jobs that give them a chance to, one, develop their soft skills. Two, work in the industry that they're targeting. Another thing that can be very helpful is volunteer, but you won't be paid, okay? But volunteer for the professional association, because that, in my experience, makes a world of difference in your job search.
Yeah. Professional associations are the best place to find the industries, information, to network and everything. Yeah. And they do things now, right?
Exactly. I mean, this is the time to do it. Everybody has time to network right now. I mean, that's my experience.
Yeah. So, Lionel, we have more 3 minutes.
Okay.
So I'd like to thank you. I'm deeply grateful for your willingness to help us and to bring all this knowledge to us. We are very strong together. So thank you all for your time. Thank you, Lionel. Thank you, Networking for Brazilians group. And stay safe.
Thank you. Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye.